Hi guys! I have recently been feeling like I have way too many eyeshadow palettes, and I think this video is proof of that because today I'm going to be showing you all of the eyeshadow palettes in my collection that I have not used in 2024. We are now 5 months into the year, so we're a little over a third of the way through 2024, and there are 17 palettes in my collection that I have not touched yet this year. I think my last palette declutter was about a year ago. It was in May of last year, so I am planning on doing another one pretty soon because I feel like I'm just at a point where I have more palettes than I can even enjoy. Including trios and quads, I currently have 49 palettes in my collection, and 17 of those I haven't even used yet this year. So I'm going to show you those palettes, and I want to try to figure out why it is I haven't used these palettes yet. For some of them, I think it very well may be that they just don't fit well into my collection. Maybe they're repetitive with other things I have in my collection, or they're just colors that I don't wear. But then for some of them, I think the reason I haven't used them is just because I have too many palettes and they're getting buried or getting overshadowed by other things. And so hopefully after I do my declutter, I can narrow down my palette collection to just things that I really feel like add something to my collection and that I'm going to enjoy using, and then get rid of anything that's just kind of in the way. So all of these palettes are sort of on the chopping block right now. They're not the only palettes that I would consider decluttering, but all of these, I think because I haven't used them yet this year, I'm going to go ahead and consider them part of my chopping block, and for the next couple of weeks I want to spend some time with them and see if they really do need to stay in my collection or if it would make sense to pass them on to someone else. I did a video like this around this time last year as well, and at the end of that video you might remember I did a palette bingo using all of the palettes that I haven't used yet this year. So because there are 17 palettes this time around, I'm going to do two looks. So I'm going to do one look on one eye and one look on the other because I think it would be kind of hard to do one look with 17 shades. The first palette that I have yet to touch in 2024 is the Anastasia Sultry palette. It actually hasn't been a terribly long time since I used this palette. I did use it a few times in December, so it has been about 5 months since I last used this palette. And by the way, I keep track of this in a spreadsheet. I did this last year and I'm doing the same thing this year where every day that I wear makeup, if I dip into a palette, I will tally one use for that palette. Whether I used one shade or 5 shades or however many shades from the palette I used, I count it as one use each time I dip into it. I tend to think of this as a holiday palette, which is why I think I get most of my use out of this in like November and December. But I also think this can be a great spring palette, especially with that pop of coral. I think there's a lot of really pretty springy looks you can do with this. So I probably won't declutter this one. I just don't see myself wanting to get rid of this yet because, I don't know, it's just such a classic. Next up, there are 4 palettes from Ace Beauté that I have yet to use this year. These 3 are from their floral collection. We have Calla, Begonia, and Flora. I actually used Calla a lot around the holidays last year, so again, it hasn't been that long since I used it. I think I did use it quite a few times in December. I think this one is my favorite of the floral collection. It is just gorgeous. I love the shimmers in here. I mean, you can even just see in the pan how glassy they are. Reminds me of kind of like a condensed version of Sultry. I guess this one is just a little bit more sultry and smoky than what I typically use in like the first half of the year. It's more of like a holiday palette to me, but I still would like to get more use out of that. Then Begonia. This one is a little bit more of a unique color story. This one has some plummy shades and then some greens as well. Pretty color story, but it's definitely out of my comfort zone, and I just don't use... I don't tend to pair berry with green. Like, I don't usually mix those two, and so I just have... I don't know. I have a hard time with this palette. I don't know if it's really for me. I don't know if it's going to make sense to keep this in my collection, but that is one. And then the Flora palette, this is the like yellow and red one. I love this one, especially for the summertime. I just think it is so much fun. And I feel like this color story just makes a lot more sense to me than the Begonia one. Obviously they're very different, but I just feel like it's a little bit easier to find color pairings in the Flora palette as opposed to the Begonia. I feel like it's just a little bit trickier if you're not like a color theory expert, which I certainly am not. I don't know. It's just it's a tricky one. But I love Flora and Calla and I don't see myself getting rid of those. Then there's the Flare palette from Ace Beauté. This one is also just a challenge for me. There's a lot of different colors in here. They're all very rich and bold. It does lean very deep as well. And I feel like the only times I've used this palette are times when I forced myself to use it because I don't use it very much organically. So I've done like some palette bingos with it, but outside of that, I just don't reach into this very often. So this is another one that I'm really considering decluttering. Oh yeah, I forgot to say the last time I used each of these palettes. So for the Ace Beauté Cala palette, the last time I used that was December. The last time I used the Flora palette was April of 2023, so it has now been over a year since I used that one. And the last time I used the Begonia palette was December, actually more recently than I thought. So I think I did like some Christmassy looks with that one. And then the Flare palette I also used in December, so hasn't been terribly long since I used most of these, except I'm actually surprised that it's been so long since I used Flora because I would consider this one of my favorites from Ace Beauté, but I think it's just because I have too many palettes and it's just impossible to use them all. So that is what we are aiming to remedy very soon. Okay, so the Goddess palette from Alter Ego, the last time I used this one was December again, so it hasn't been too terribly long, but also I just feel, for some reason I feel like this is like a summer and fall palette, not the kind of color story that I use a ton in like the first half of the year. This one I'm really surprised I haven't used yet this year. It's the Alter Ego Midsummer palette. The last time I used this was in August of 2023. And this was actually one of my most used palettes of 2023, but I was mainly using it just a ton in the summertime. Maybe that's because it has summer in the name. And I also think I haven't had this as part of my seasonal palette basket since maybe the summer or fall. So that's another reason I think I haven't used it, is just because I haven't had it as part of my palette basket. And I've actually decided I think I'm going to stop doing my palette basket seasonally and instead just switch it out every time I do an everyday makeup drawer video, which I do those about once a month. Because I think what I've realized, I've been doing that seasonal palette basket for about a year now, and I feel like I end up having too many palettes that I want to have in the basket for a season. And so I end up just getting kind of overwhelmed with just how many palettes are in the basket. And then I also feel like I would benefit from switching it out a little bit more frequently. So that's what I'm going to plan to do from now on. And again, this is why we're doing this video, because it's so sad to me that I would consider this one of my favorite palettes in my collection, and I haven't used it in months. Like, that should not be happening. And I also think this is the perfect time of year to use this palette, especially with that lavender shade. I love any kind of like pastel color in the spring, and I really want to do a look with that shade soon. Next, we have the Athr Beauty Citrine quad. The last time I used this quad was in November, and I absolutely love this quad. Also, by the way, speaking of Athr, did you guys hear that Athr is coming back? They recently announced on their website they were bought out by another company, and they're bringing back a select few products this summer. I don't know what those products are going to be, but on their website they say to sign up for their mailing list for updates. So if you want to be updated when they do come back, definitely sign up for their mailing list. I am so happy, so happy to hear that. I hope this is one of the products they bring back because I love this quad. Just a great little warm brown quad. Now, I have said before, I actually feel like this quad is kind of like a condensed version of the Sigma Ambiance palette, which is another one of my top favorite palettes. And so I'm wondering, even though I love this quad and I love Sigma Ambiance, do I need both? Because I think I could probably dupe all four of these shades with Sigma Ambiance, but at the same time, it's so nice to have a little quad like this. I feel like it's great for travel. I don't travel that often, so I don't know if that's a great excuse to keep something. So yeah, I'm on the fence about this one because even though I love it, I just don't know if it's necessary to keep. Next is another one of my old favorites, the Essence Coral Me Maybe palette. The last time I used this was August of 2023, so it's been quite a while. I definitely think of this one as a spring and summer palette, so now is the time to bust it out. And also 2024 is the year of peach. The Pantone color of the year this year is Peach Fuzz, so perfect time to use this palette. I really do miss it. I think this is such a great little curated 6-pan. This next one I'm also not surprised that I haven't used yet this year. This is the Estate Mystic Forest palette. This one I have been holding on to for a long time. I've had this since before we moved to Washington, so it's been a long time. And I always say this is such a fall palette to me. These really are not colors that I wear much throughout the year except for in the fall when I'm doing like more grungy toned looks. And I honestly feel like this palette is not that special except for this shade down here, this bronzy olive shade. Really beautiful shade. It's so foiled and sparkly. It reminds me a lot of like a ColourPop Super Shock shadow type of formula. The rest of the palette, like the quality is good, but the shades are just not all that special to me. So I'm really gonna have to think about, do I really need to keep this palette? The last time I used this one was in October, and I used this palette exactly twice in 2023. One of those times being in October, the other one of those times being in the version of this video that I did last year. This was also one of the palettes that I didn't use for the first like half of the year, and so I used it in that palette bingo, and that was one of my uses. So organically, I used this once last year. Do I need to keep a palette that I'm only using once a year? I don't know. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense. So I'm gonna have to think about that. But I just get such a sentimental attachment to some palettes. Like, I don't know what it is about this one, but I just, something about it just makes me happy. Really, it's the packaging, I think. I think it's the packaging. That's like the main reason why I feel so attached to it. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Then we have two of my Flower Beauty palettes that I have not used yet this year, Coastal Lights and Desert Lights. I am forever confused as to why I don't use these more often, because I have shared so many times my love for these palettes. I think the formula is so special. Such a unique palette, really. Like, you don't see a lot of all shimmer palettes, but I think the reason I don't use these that much is, again, because they're all shimmer. Usually, even though I love shimmer shadows, I'm almost always, unless I'm doing a one and done look, I'm using mattes and shimmers. So I either have to find another palette to pair these with, or I'm just using them as one and done shades. But when I'm doing a one and done look, usually I'm looking to my single shadows, not a palette. So that's my explanation as to why I don't use these more. That's Desert Lights. Coastal Lights is a bit newer. This one came out more recently. I think it launched like last fall, and I bought it shortly after it launched. And so far I've only used Coastal Lights once in the entire time that I've had it, since October. So the last time I used this was October. The last time I used Desert Lights was September. So I haven't used either of these since the fall. Coastal Lights is the one that's a little bit different from the other Flower Lights palettes because this has a lot more satin shades in it. I just feel like I don't know this palette very well at all, and I would like to change that. Another quad I haven't used yet this year is the Hard Candy Moods quad in the shade Purr. The last time I used this one was in December of 2023. I do feel like this is another one of those palettes that I only use when I force myself to use it. I used to love mauves and plums on my eyes, but these days I really don't. I find that they look heavy on me. I feel like they age me a little bit, and I just don't love mauves on myself, especially these tones. I have done some looks with this that I've liked, but I also feel like these tones have the tendency to make me look like I have a black eye. I would say this is one of the better quality quads from Hard Candy. This line was kind of hit or miss, but I did feel like this one was pretty nice. The deep shade in here, you do have to build it up quite a bit. But the other three shades I would say are really nice. So like for $4, it's not a bad quad if you really like these kinds of tones. But for me, I don't know if it's going to make sense to keep this in my collection. I do still have the Hard Candy Buzz quad, which is the yellow one. That one I have used this year, so it's not in this video, and I do like that one. I don't see myself getting rid of that one. I think that's my favorite of the entire line. I think they sent me the whole line. I kept a few, and I've slowly kind of decluttered them, and really Buzz is the only one that I feel like needs to stay in my collection. So that is the Purr quad from Hard Candy. I can't believe I haven't used this one yet this year. I really thought I had. So unless I forgot to tally it, which is possible, but this is the Kaja Beauty Bento in Peach Madeleine. I think I received this in PR at the end of last year, and the last time I used it was in December. But this is something that I really want to use more, especially as we're getting into the summer. Like I said, I love peach eyeshadows. Super cute little trio. I do think this is the kind of thing that I would get a lot of use out of if I didn't have so many palettes. Sad to say, I haven't used my Lethal Cosmetics Custom 12 pan yet this year either. The last time I used this one was a year ago in May. Not proud to say that either because, I mean, first of all, I custom made this palette, so ideally it should be shades that I want to use a lot. I do think that since I built this palette, my preferences have changed a little bit. I think, and maybe I should swap out some of the shades because that's the beauty of these custom palettes is you can customize them. really it's these mauve shades that aren't speaking to me like they once did. And this really bright coral is just a little much. Like it's just not a shade I'm going to use. I did feel like this shade looked a lot brighter in person than it did on the website. So there's a few shades in here that I might like to replace with different shades. So I might look into doing that, but still, all the other shades in here I really like, especially, and there's so many great spring tones in here, like the periwinkle, the yellow, the green, and these multi-chromes up here are gorgeous. Really looking forward to using this again. This one I am always struggling to use. This is the Quo Beauty Stacked Eyeshadow in Snowcone. This is a quad. It has a couple of cool taupey shades, like this cool gray satin shade, this taupe matte, and this just neutral rosy taupe shimmer. And then it also has this pop of mint. Cute colors, but very average quality. I feel like, especially that mint shade, you really have to build it up to get it to show up. So I don't feel like their formula is a dupe for the Kaja stacked eyeshadows by any means. Not to say you can't get a really pretty look out of this quad. I also think the other thing is I just have not been into cool tones very much recently, so this is another one that I'm thinking I'm probably going to declutter. But we're going to give it another chance. The last time I used that one was in December. And the last palette that I have yet to use this year is the Unleasha Glitterpedia No. 7 palette. The last time I used this was in September when I received it, and I really enjoyed it then. But as I said when I first reviewed this back in the fall, was that I felt like this was a total spring and summer color story for me. So again, now is the time to bring it out and use it. I do love all the different textures they use in these Glitterpedia palettes. I also have the Glitterpedia No. 1. That one is all shimmer. This one does have some mattes, including one of my favorite types of mattes, which is a rosy beige, as well as a pastel peach matte. I am excited to use this some more. I definitely want to pull this into my palette basket next time I refresh my everyday makeup drawers. So those are the 17 palettes that I have not yet used in 2024. This is really a mix of palettes that I love but just haven't been able to use, and palettes that I just don't feel that strongly about and that probably are going to make sense to pass on. But without further ado, let's actually put all of these palettes to use. Just to kind of get reacquainted with them, I want to do a palette bingo using all 17 of them. So we have an odd number of palettes. What I want to do is one look on each eye. The first grouping of palettes are going to be the first 8, and those are all the ones that start with an A, which is funny that like half of these palettes start with an A. I guess there are just a lot of brands that start with an A. So starting with Athr Citrine, I'm going to randomly select one of these shades, and I use the Pretty Random app. So we're picking a shade 1 through 14. I got shade number 1, which is a nice shade to have in a palette bingo. It's just a matte cream color, the shade Fresh. It's always nice to get some easy shades thrown in, because I'm sure we will get some challenges thrown our way as well. Next in the alphabet is the Ace Beauté Begonia palette. We're going to pick 1 through 8. We got the number 1 again. So that is this light shimmer. So there's that beautiful, really wet looking shimmer. Next in line is the Cala palette. We got number 3. Another light shimmer. This is that silver shimmer shade. There's a little bit of a blue undertone to it. There's that, so metallic. Then we have, actually next in the alphabet is the Flare palette from Ace, and this is a 15 pan. We got 14, which is the second to last shade, and I actually think this is one of the shades I haven't yet used in this palette. It looks untouched. That's the shade Moss. Now things are getting interesting. Last Ace palette is the Flora. For that we got shade number 8, which is the last shade, and that is this deep brown shade. Sorry about the kind of messy swatches. Next we have Alter Ego Goddess. This is another 15 pan. We got shade number 2. So that is the shade Athena, which is this mustard brown. So I feel like these colors go together pretty well. Then we have Alter Ego Midsummer, which is a 12 pan. We got shade number 2 again. And this is another green. This is the shade Meadow. And that is like an olive green. And then last for this first grouping, we have the Athr Beauty Citrine Quad. We got shade number 3, and that is this taupe shimmer here. Okay, so those are the 8 shades that I'm going to incorporate in my first look. Alright, so let's get to work with these shades, and then we'll do our second look. Thinking I want to start out my crease with that mustard brown from the Alter Ego Goddess palette. That was the shade Athena on a medium-sized crease brush. And we're just going to start by working that into the crease. This is definitely going to be a mossy green look. I actually really like the colors that were chosen. I think they all work together really nicely. Actually, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to pack this shade all over my lid as well to act as a base for the shimmers that we're going to use. So I'm just taking this on a shader brush and I'm packing that all the way across my lid. Next, I'm going to dip into that super green matte shade Moss from the Ace Beauté Flare palette. This I'm going to pick up on a slightly smaller crease brush, and that I'm going to really target in my crease. We're gonna green it up over here. And you know what, I'll just go ahead and work this into my outer corner also. This is a very pukey green kind of combo. It's really turning that mustard very yellow also. Ooh, I don't know if that looks all that flattering just yet, but we're gonna keep moving. So kind of just hopping from one green to the next. I'm gonna dip into that really olivey green from the Midsummer palette, the shade Meadow, on another small crease brush. And I'm going to build this up in my outer corner to just create a little bit of depth. And I'm not gonna be afraid to bring some of this down here to my lower lash line just to kind of connect it with the outer corner. So as you can see, I'm kind of just working my way through the mattes. So now I'm going to dip into that deepest matte that we got. That's this last shade of the Flora palette from Ace Beauté. And I'm going to pick that up on a smudge brush. This one I'm just going to keep close to my lash line here in this outer third of my eye. Really just building up some depth. I'm going to bring some of that down here as well. Okay, so those are all the mattes except for the matte cream, which we'll use last. I'm actually thinking I really like pairing silver with like bronzy and or golden shades. I actually feel like they look really cool next to each other. So I'm going to go in first with that bronzy shimmer from the Athr palette. I actually feel like this shade swatches a lot more bronze than it looks in the pan. I think because it's next to some really warm tones. This shade actually is pretty warm though. So I'm just going to pick that up. That shade is called Flame. That I'm going to, although I feel like it doesn't look that bronze on my eye next to these colors. This I'm just tapping here in the center of my lid and then working it out towards the outer corner. I'm not bringing it all the way to the outer corner, but I am overlapping it with some of those mattes. Then on this inner part of my lid, I'm going to take some of that silver from the Ace Beauté Cala palette. This is such an intense shimmer. Like you can practically see your own reflection in this shade. And that I'm going to tap here in this like inner third of my lid. And I am going to slightly overlap it with that brown shimmer. Oh yeah, that brought some really nice brightness to this look. I felt like it was looking a little dull before, but that kind of just solved that problem. Then for my inner corner, we're going to go into that last shimmer shade from the Ace Beauté Begonia palette, and we're going to pop that right there in the inner corner. And I'm also going to overlap it a little bit with the silver. And that leaves us with one last shade, and it's the easiest one. That is the shade Fresh from the Sultry palette. This shade we're going to just use to kind of clean up the edges of the look. Here on the brow bone and in this outer corner. Okay, that turned out really fun. At first I was not loving all those super pukey greens like all at once on my eyes, but I feel like it came together really nicely and I love what that silver brought to the table. I feel like that was kind of the star of the show. Now for look number 2, we're going to use the remaining 9 palettes, starting with the Essence Coral Me Maybe palette. So this is a 6 pan. We got shade number 2. That is this peach shimmer up here. There she is. Next up is the Estate Mystic Forest palette, 1 through 9, 1. That is so funny. Okay, that's the shade Pixie. This was also one of the palettes featured in last year's video, and that is the exact same shade that was selected last time. So that is just this champagne shimmer. Okay. Those two look pretty next to each other. Next up is Flower Coastal Lights, 5. Ooh. So that is this purple shade down here. That's the shade called Aqua. Okay, so far really loving these colors. Let's see what we get for the Desert Lights palette now. 1 through 6. 1. Alright, so that is this first shade up here. That's the shade Mirage. Just a light rosy shimmer. Can't go wrong with that. So far we have all shimmers over here on this side. So there's that. Okay, next is the Hard Candy Per Quad 3. That is this mid-toned mauve shimmer. There is that, getting a little bit more depth now. Next we have the Kaja Trio in Peach Madeleine. Got shade number 1, and that is that more foiled golden shimmer in here. Yet another shimmer. So there's that. Okay, then we have my Lethal Custom 12 pan. Shade number 10. Ooh, okay, finally we got a matte, and it is a matte green. That is this shade down here. Ooh, a really fun, bright spring green. Next is the Quo Stacked Quad in Snowcone 3. Alright, yay, another matte. We got that taupe matte. I like this color story so far. So we have one more. This is the Unleasha Glitterpedia number 7. We got shade number 2, and that is this light peach satin shade. Okay, so those are our 9 shades for the second look. I actually love this combo so much. I think this is such a springy color story. Still got a pop of green, but it's definitely not going to be nearly as green as that first look. What to do with all these colors though? That's the question. I think I'm going to do kind of like a gradient over on this eye with some of these fun pops of color, and I think I want that green to be in the outer corner, and then maybe have the purple in the middle and the peach on the inside. It's kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah, so I'm actually going to start the look with that Coven shade from the Lethal palette. I'm going to pick that up on the BK Beauty 206, which is like kind of like a crease brush, but it's pinched in, so it works like a shader brush and a crease brush combined. I'm just going to start by packing this in like the outer third of my lid. Okay, the next color I'm going to have that fade into, I think is going to be the peach from the Essence palette. This is that shade called Wish in the Well. And I'm going to pop that in the center third of my lid. In last year's video, I only had 7 palettes to feature in that video, much more reasonable. So I did just one palette bingo look with those shades, and it ended up being a peach and green look. I can link that video below if you want to see it. But we're doing some peach and green again. My third color I'm going to have on my lid is going to be that purple shade from the Coastal Lights palette, the shade Aqua. And that is going to go right here in the inner third. You guessed it. This is one of my favorite types of colorful looks to do in the spring, especially with any pastel shades. I feel like the peach and the purple would be considered pastel, but the green's not that pastel. But I like having just like either 3 or 4 colors, just one after another, kind of like rainbow sherbet. Okay, so we only ended up with 2 mattes, but I think that's going to work out just fine. I'm going to dip into the other matte now from the Quo Stacked eyeshadow, that taupey. It's actually really rosy. I'm going to take that on a really small crease brush. I'm going to work that into my crease over here on really just like the inner half of my eye. I think this works as a good blending shade for the purple and peach. This is kind of a neutral matte. Then I'm going to dip back into our green matte with a different small crease brush, and that I'm going to just work above the green and then bring it towards the middle and just blend it in the center with that taupe matte. So I'm just bringing the green up slightly higher. Okay, so I've now used 4 out of the 9 shades, but I feel like I've used the 4 most challenging ones now. Let's see, what is next? Okay, I'm going to dip into now that Satin Peach shade from the Unleasha Glitterpedia palette. This actually has a little bit of like a cool pink shimmer to it, very slightly. And so I'm going to pop this next to the purple in my inner corner. This is going to be, yeah, kind of a subtle inner corner highlight since it is more satiny, but I think that looks really pretty. I keep having to adjust my brightness because the sun keeps going behind clouds and it comes back out from clouds. I thought this Hard Candy shade from the Per Quad was going to be super mauvey, but I actually feel like next to all these other shades, it kind of just looks like a brownish taupe. So I don't think it'll be too weird looking next to these shades. I'm gonna pop this on my lower lash line. And then I might layer some other things over that. We'll see. Let me go ahead and actually take some of this up here in the outer corner of the upper lash line as well, just to connect the upper and lower. Yes, so I do want to layer something over that. I'm going to dip into this Desert Lights shade, the shade Mirage. I'm just going to pick some of that up on my pinky, and I'm going to pop that in the center of the lower lash line, just in the middle, just to kind of brighten it up a little bit. I feel like that really opens up my eye. Okay, so the only other two shades I need to figure out what to do with are these two lighter shimmers, that more golden shimmer from the Estate Mystic Forest palette and this super sparkly one from the Kaja. I don't normally put a shimmer on the brow bone, but I think that's what we're going to do today with Pixie from the Estate Mystic Forest palette. I'm just going to pick out a small amount of that shade, and we are just going to pop that right up here. Actually, that is really pretty. I like that. Just adds a nice subtle highlight to the brow bone, nothing too extreme, but it ties in nicely with that warm peach, which, by the way, I am going to add a little bit more peach because I feel like it's gotten kind of lost in between those other two colors. So I'm going to take some more of that and pop it there in the center of my lid. So that leaves us with this one last shade from the Kaja stack. This, to me, is a really pretty topper shade. So I'm just going to take a small amount of this on my finger and use it as a topper over the purple and the peach. I still want those two colors to be very apparent, so I'm not going to take too much of this, but just enough to add a little bit more glow to the lids. I just finished off both looks with some mascara, and on the lips, I'm just going to keep it simple with my Tower 28 lip gloss in Pistachio. I'm almost done with this. I have now successfully applied 17 eyeshadows to my face, and I'm really curious to hear which of the two looks is your favorite. Let me cover up this eye. Just imagine I have this look on both eyes. And there's the second look. I really like both looks. It's very interesting to see how the different colors change the shape of my eyes. Like, this eye looks completely different than this one, just because I have a lot more contrast between these colors. Like, we have some really deep shades and some really light shades. This side is mostly mid-tones. Personally, I would have to say I like the second side a little bit better, just because I tend to like lighter tones on my eyes. I do really like this side as well. I think if you were to ask me in the fall, I would probably say this side is my favorite. But right now I'm really enjoying color, and I just really like the way this side turned out. But I'm happy to be able to say now that I've used all my palettes at least once this year, even if it was just one shade, I have now at least dipped a brush into all my palettes. So that feels really good. Throughout the next couple of weeks, I am going to try to use as many of these palettes as I can, just a few more times, and just get a feel for which ones really need to stay in my collection and which ones I might be ready to let go of. Stay tuned for my palette declutter. That should be coming probably either at the end of this month or beginning of June. And I do want to say, if you like palette bingos or any kind of makeup roulette style video, I do those pretty frequently over on my Patreon and channel membership. In fact, this month's patron and member exclusive makeup video is a palette bingo with my magnetic singles, which was a ton of fun. So that video will be coming soon to the Patreon and membership. And my patrons and members get an exclusive makeup video and vlog every month. So I would love to have you join. It's $2 a month, and you can pick whichever platform you prefer. Both the patrons and members get the exact same videos, the same perks and everything. The only difference is channel members get some custom emojis that you can use to comment on my videos, just because that's a feature that YouTube membership offers that Patreon doesn't. But otherwise, they are the exact same, so just pick whichever you prefer. But that, I think, wraps up today's video. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you had fun. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hopefully I will talk to you again very soon in my next video. Bye!